good. Just what I was hoping. So people sometimes wonder why an architect is engaged in research, and my motivation is to provide the environments that suit the people for whom we have designed them. And you'd be probably surprised how often that goes by the wayside. So this particular project was motivated by my concern about gun violence we've experienced in our country and other parts of the world, and what can designers do to help mitigate that. I just want to acknowledge the team of people. I'm going to summarize this research project quickly, then tell you about the next few ones we're working on. Acknowledge the participation of my team members. The question is, I pose it right here, can design help to solve the gun violence epidemic? We know a lot about, so speaking to your issue, what would I do based on my motivation right now to provide joy would be to provide access to nature and places within that natural environment for people to build their cultural settings to help them feel supported. So we do many studies indicating that when you have access to nature, there are health benefits, including stress reduction and other things, and that introduction of some of these spaces is particularly crucial in some communities. There are people who have worked on this beforehand in these studies that looked at residential housing, some with gardens, some with not, and then this kind of summary that says if you have a lot of, you have low vegetation, your crimes go up. So we do know that this is the case, and what we wanted to do was, and another example of the type of intervention people will do. So we knew this was generally the case, but the literature out there is quite broad, and so we wound up doing a classic systematic review. Actually, it was a more of a review, a scoping review, they would call it, because we wound up looking at 40,000 papers that were related to this. So you imagine when you put in, even if you put in architecture, people talk about the architecture of the neuron, but you have to sort of narrow in on this. We wound up with 2 people working in parallel, not consulting with one another, identifying these papers, and I was sort of the deal breaker. It took us over 2 years to actually do this process, and came up with 45. And rather than, this gives you an overview, what I'm going to show you briefly next, and there, we looked at 5 kinds of green space, and all violent crime, and then crime involving homicides and non-homicide. So what I would say is, one reason we do this is people know that parks are good. If we can demonstrate that by building a park, you can actually save the city money, all of a sudden people go, oh, okay, that's good. So we also look at the return on investment, and sometimes a single murder can cost a city up to $500,000. So think what you could do with just creating a community park using that same amount of money apart from the other kinds of activities. So parks are hard to evaluate because they are so different, and because you can't do have a non-park and then a park, because parks take a long time to grow. So the results on parks are pretty split. So if it says down, that means crime is down. Three helping with reducing crime, and 3 winding increasing it. Community gardens turn out to be, talk about places of joy, community gardens turn out to be a place that really have a big impact on a neighborhood. So you can see that there was 6 studies found that crime went down in neighborhoods that had these community gardens, and introduced pre and post, and that was something you could do and look at over time. Just putting trees along a street and some grass and a place to sit on a corner had this very important impact. So you can see 4 of the studies wound up saying crime went down. All these things have to be done in the context of the neighborhood and what the community wants. So sometimes people have had these programs that have not worked out because they have not had buy-in. So this is all community collaborative work. Ground cover, lots of studies on this, because basically this means you look at GIS data, and you can see where the parks are, and you can compare that to census areas with crime, and we know where there's more green space, there tends to be less crime, significantly less. For undeveloped green areas, this was sort of a non-starter because they are so varied, and because they often are more associated with more rural areas. So our issue is, okay, we know this is happening, but why is it happening? And so what are the possible mediators between presence of green space and crime? So we sort of brainstormed, made up these 6 ideas, and then I'll explore them a little, but our current project is we have 2 grants out seeking support to pay significant salaries to members of the community to serve jointly with us as researchers on this project. And so Those of you that are aware of communities that have had green installations, I'd love if you'd approach me because I'd like to give them the opportunity to $10,000, $20,000 a year salary would significantly help their ability to participate rather than be leaning on them to try and do all this extra work. So places for community interaction, basically you create this particular space, people are going to wind up coming there and meeting one another and establishing knowledge of their neighbors. Places to exercise, lots of data about how you exercise enhances your mental health perspective, both psychological and physical. How many people here have heard the term biophilia? So a couple of hands went up. The other day I saw it being advertised in one of the gas pumps when I was getting gas. I thought, oh, our time has come. So biophilia essentially are innate affiliation with nature. We evolved understanding nature. By understanding nature, we are more likely to survive. That's the essential idea behind that. So there are lots of things associated with that, like look at water, your blood pressure drops. Steve Kaplan did a lot of work on the restorative aspects of nature. So if you're talking about, it's not joy exactly, but if you are focusing on a very difficult problem, even 10 minutes, 3 times a week in nature, focusing on nature alone will modify your mental health perspective. And there are several studies that support that. Territoriality, very controversial area when you look at the theory of broken windows, but essentially the issue is if a territory, it's not clear who owns that territory, it's up for grabs. And that creates a dynamic that might not go well. Community cohesion, if you receive support from your local government to have these interventions, that is a message to your community and perhaps make you start to feel about your neighbors as being part of a collective trying to accomplish something. And the last one is climate modulation. And so that, I know a lot of people here are interested in climate. In fact, if you have green space, you don't have the heat island effect, the radiating heat that comes off the tarmac and the concrete and all of that. And also that the leaves themselves tend to filter particulate out of the air. So that may be contributing to it. So where we are now, it's my last slide, where we are now is trying to get this money to get support from the communities. We also did a study where we took 9 of those 45, we took all their data, put it together, did a meta-analysis, and reanalyzed it, and then found we had positive results, and then we tried to calibrate the dollars saved, because we want this to go out to municipalities so they know what's going on, so they would feel free to implement some of these changes. So thank you very much.